In this conversation with the really inspiring cellist Rachel Mercer, we discussed the arc of her career so far as a chamber musician, soloist, principal cellist, the late Yehonatan Berick, an amazing violinist and pedagogue who was her life partner, Our Strength, Our Song, with her sister, the wonderful violinist Akemi Mercer-Niewöhner, and many other chamber music collaborations and unique projects, as well as her way of approaching music. Rachel very generously made a special recording of the Prelude from J.S. Bach's Fifth Solo Suite, and her heartfelt introduction to the power of this music is right after our conversation, so please keep listening to the end. There's also a timestamp for the Bach, and in the podcast version, the Bach with her introduction is also a separate bonus episode. Good morning, Rachel Mercer.
Good morning.
You are such an incredible cellist and inspiring colleague, and I'm so glad you agreed to have this conversation with me. Some people, not very many, ask if I have a list of questions before we speak, and I always say no, I don't. And it might interest you. Like, I was thinking this is my 28th such conversation in the last 9 months. I've done a lot. And it's really interesting because the themes that have come out, like in season 1, the first 20, you know, a lot of things, because we're living through this pandemic, how people are dealing with it as performing artists, and also the nature of creativity and improvisation came up a lot. And in the second season already, I'm noticing things keep coming up about the music business. And actually, that's a big part of what you've been able to do in terms of grant writing and get support for all your many wonderful commissions. So we'll dive into that a little bit. But you might be curious, Rachel. So yeah, I don't have a list of questions. What I did when I got up at 5:30 this morning, I drew this ridiculous, like,
cool.
You know, drawing. So it's just like different sort of thought ideas, things we might get to, you know. So that's kind
neat.
Of the way it's going to go. Yeah. And I knew, you know, a little bit about you for sure. And I remember like a couple years ago when they opened up the new part of the National Arts Center where we work, they wanted people to play in the new space. And I played with my string quartet at the time, and you had said, oh, sure, I'll go play solo Bach for an hour, no problem. I think you did it a couple times. And I remember meeting you downstairs, and I said, wow, that's really generous of you to offer to do that. So much work. Is that stuff in your fingers? And you said, well, you know, I recorded it, and yeah, I'm happy to do it. And I was so impressed. And actually, when I got up early this morning, I was listening to your recording of the solo Bach, which I've heard before, so incredible, which you recorded on the very famous Strad that you borrowed from the Canada Council. So you've had this amazing opportunity to play on a series of great instruments.
Yeah.
So that particular instrument, I mean, that must have been incredible to play Bach on that. What was it? The Bonjour Strad?
Oh yeah. So that particular time, the Canada Council for the Arts Musical Instrument Bank is this bank of, you know, now I think over 14 violins, and at the time 3 cellos, and now there's 5 at least, I think. And they have this 1696 Stradivarius cello, nicknamed the Bonjour because it belonged to Abel Bonjour many years ago. And of course it was alive when the Bach cello suites were written, so which would have been like 1717, I think, the later ones. But so to play an instrument from that time already is a very interesting idea, that you wonder if it was played on that, if the Bach suites were played on it. And but just any really old instrument from that time in Italy. There was those incredible famous makers, and this instrument has lived through many years and many players and many times in music. And it's also transformed. I think the instrument that we play on doesn't look exactly like what it was then, and of course the whole setup with the strings and the bridge and everything is totally different. So but I think the wood retains something after all these years. And so you definitely feel that history, and of course all these incredible instruments by these great makers, they're works of art, and they have their personality of their own. So to me, the greater the instrument, the more complexity and depth and layers of possibility they have. And whether you get to that depth within your 3 years of the loan or not, I don't think for me, it wasn't impossible. It was like, I'd play for it for 6 months and I'd be like, okay, I'm starting to get a feel for it. And then a year later, you're in a performance and you do something and you're like, whoa, I didn't know that was possible. Like that's amazing when that happens, when you just like, in the moment in a performance, you just go a different way physically, and the instrument responds. You're like, oh my God, I didn't know I could do that. And then you explore more, and playing an instrument in different spaces and different kind of formations of ensemble, and on recording, hearing back from, because of course it's very different what you hear under the ear from far away, and then adjusting to that. And I think it was like, when you get alone, it's going to end. And these it's going to end in 3 years. So you always have in your mind, like, okay, this is a 3-year relationship. It's going to end at this point. So when it got to the 3 years, I knew it was going to end. So I wasn't crying or anything. But I think I played some Bach on it to say goodbye the last day, and then gave it back.
Yeah.
but yeah, to have those loans, it's just a luxury, really.
Do you know anything of the history of how the Canada Council obtained that instrument?
That particular instrument, yes. Wait, I'm trying to remember how they got that one. That one was an anonymous donor.
Wow.
Some of them the Canada Council have bought, some have been donated. That one is an anonymous donor.
That's incredible.
Yes.
I was thinking about what you were saying, how the instrument was different. And for non-string players out there, they may not realize how much, in a way, how little our instruments have changed over the years, but certainly the tension on the instrument was a lot less. And you studied in the Netherlands as your last formal education, and that's a big center for original instrument performance practice, whatever you want to call it. That must have influenced you, hearing that kind of playing.
Maybe, I don't know if particularly there. I mean, because my studies at the time, I was doing 2 years at the conservatory, and I was studying with Dmitri Ferschtman, so it wasn't focused around that kind of music. And I have to say, when growing up in Toronto, going to school in Toronto, and TOEFL music was there, and then I went to Boston and studied at NEC, and there was a really great early music department there, and I got to play with them sometimes. And then when I went to Holland, it just wasn't part of my studies. But I did once, I don't know if you know Colin Jacobson, the violinist, who's based in New York. Now he conducts too. He created the Knights, that chamber orchestra, and he was actually living in Amsterdam and taking lessons privately with Vera Betts at the time, who's the great early music violinist, whose husband happens to be Anner Bylsma, the late Anner Bylsma. And I was playing some chamber music with a student of hers, and he was also there at the time, and playing for Vera Betts. So we're in their house and playing for her. And then the door opens and a man walks in, and it's Anner Bylsma. And so he just walked in, and I think he's just kind of listening and commenting. And so that was really neat. But also, actually, when I was in Toronto, Anner Bylsma came to play. And of course, I heard him play the Bach suites in Amsterdam too, in the big hall one year. But he did give a masterclass, and I got to play for him in a masterclass. So, I remember that class. I remember what he said. I remember what it was like. And of course, hearing him live. So, for me, that's a big influence. Just what he's put out, all his recordings, hearing him live, meeting him a little bit in person was a very big thing. But yeah, all the places that I've been very lucky to get to experience really incredible period music.
So what did Anner Bylsma say in that masterclass?
I played the first, the Prelude of the Sixth Suite, and I think the biggest thing I took from that was this idea of throwing and catching the bow. That was his idea for the movement of how. Obviously I was playing in a modern way with a modern instrument, and I wasn't trying really hard to emulate period performance, but of course the aesthetic was there in my head and my ear, and that idea of that it's not a fixed kind of playing on the string, but that you release and catch. And that's of course how we work on the string anyways, to keep the vibration going. And when you would watch him play, I could still picture the whole six suites in the big hall, watching him play and just like seeing what he was doing with the instrument. And there is that idea of really drawing sound out. And of course, when they play, usually there's no end pin. And so there's this just much more movement with the instrument, like constant kind of balancing. So yeah.
Is that akin for violinists using a shoulder rest? Like that stability is lacking? Have you tried when you play without an end pin?
I've never really. I mean, I like jokingly don't put the end pin out sometimes and try to do it, but I feel like my legs are too short to do it. I can't even imagine how. But I mean, of course, people do that, and it's obviously a technique you have to learn and figure out. And yeah, I imagine if you're playing like some big concerto where you have to shift around the instrument, it in a way makes it a very different experience. But I'm sure it's like violinists without the shoulder rest, there's just more movement, or you do a different kind of movement. It's not just this fixed and then the hands moving.
Yeah, I think it must be similar in that as the repertoire progressed, like for violinists, depending on your physical setup, but to have a big vibrato and be shifting really high and all this stuff is a totally different type of technique than playing Baroque music. So and so you said you heard him play in the Concertgebouw solo Bach. Wow, that must have been amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in Amsterdam during my studies 2 years, like down the street from the Concertgebouw, and I went to every single concert I could. So they have concerts every day, and then some in the afternoon, and so at least like 3 concerts a week, and everyone came there, and the halls are beautiful, the sound is amazing. So yeah, that was an incredible experience.
And you won a competition. I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong. The Vriendenkrans. Vriendenkrans, something like that, yeah. And as a result of that, you got to do a solo recital in the Concertgebouw, or the smaller?
Yeah. That is a competition for people in or Holland who are Dutch or studying there or living there. And I played with Jelger Blanken, who's a great pianist with a great chamber solo career. And at the time we were both kind of studying and working together a lot, playing a lot of recitals together. And was the final round in the Concertgebouw too? I think it was. And then you got to play a little bit there too. And I have to say, it wasn't the first time I got to play in that hall, because I did a masterclass the summer before, and we got to play our final kind of concert in there too. So, and that hall, I always say, I've said a couple of times how I also went to concerts there. You kind of walk in, and all the doors coming in are surrounded by these huge, heavy red velvet curtains. If you've been there, and you kind of walk through that, and then everything is like plush red velvet, and then there's like the wood on the stage, and then around the hall, in the small and big hall, are the names of great composers. So you walk into this environment, and there's this kind of hush because of the soft, but you really feel like the air, I've said this before, that has vibrated with the music of all these people and the breath of all these people, and for years and years. And so it's just it's a very kind of magical atmosphere, and definitely being on the stage, you feel that kind of aliveness, but a warmth because of the wood and the plush. And yeah.
As a result of that competition, was that why you were able to do your debut solo recording, Room, or was that separate opportunity?
No, that was a totally separate thing. Did you want to hear about Room? Or?
Of course I do.
Yeah, okay.
I was yeah.
Oh, so that came a bit later. After my studies, I joined the Aviv string quartet. They're an Israeli quartet who happened to be studying in Holland and in Germany at the time, and their cellist left, and they ended up with me. They played with a lot of people, and I was really lucky to join them at that time. So we started our time together, and we spent a lot of time in Israel. So in Israel, I met a record producer who had worked with many, you know, in Europe and all over the world, and he was interested in doing something together, and so that was the result of that room, which was a solo album of just kind of short things. And he produces all kinds of music, not really classical, actually, more like rock, folk, out there stuff. I guess it was an experiment to work with me and see where it would go. And so we ended up just doing really that together, and I did some collaborations. But the output on his label Entity is really an interesting, eclectic kind of mix of neat things and artists.
There was a piece on there I wanted to ask you, Passaggio by Ernst, I'm probably going to say his name wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Reijseger?
Ernst Reijseger, yeah.
Reijseger. Yeah, he seems really interesting. Do you know him personally?
Yeah, well, he's actually Dutch and cellist, and he came to Chamberfest in Ottawa actually a few years ago. Roman brought him, and he did a whole like cello ensemble thing because he writes his own stuff. He's an improviser, of course. The piece that I played of his is kind of a more like, what would you call it, like poppy, folky kind of improv. Like it would be something he would just sit down and improvise it.
Yeah.
He wrote it out for us that don't do that like me. So yeah, the stuff that we played on that concert was really neat, atmospheric, wild, fun stuff. So yeah, he's a really interesting artist to check out.
Yeah. So you studied, I'm curious, because you had like 9 teachers in your youth, and that ending was Shauna Rolston, and then you went to all these different universities. And you've played for so many famous people in master classes as well. So I'm curious what the different institutions were like in terms of like, you know, Royal Conservatory, U of T, New England Conservatory, Conservatory in Amsterdam. Are there things that kind of stick out for you in terms of the contrast between the institutions and the learning experience?
Sure. I mean, my experience was different because of the programs that I was in and my age and, you know, where I was in my own, you know, development. So I think that really shapes it. I mean, I grew up just outside Toronto, so I went to the Conservatory for the Young Artists Performance Academy, which is like a pre-college kind of program. And there I got, you know, all the history and theory classes, and then I got to play in a regular string quartet. Like we were actually pretty serious. We rehearsed a lot, and, you know, ear training and orchestra and chamber music, chamber orchestra. So it was a kind of all-round experience happening during high school. So that was my conservatory experience. Very like, you know, you'd go once in the week and then on Saturday all day, that kind of thing. So that was really, all my friends were there, and that was a really happy growing up experience with music all around that. And then I went to the University of Toronto, which was a great experience for me, working with Shauna Rolston. It was just the right person for me at the time. She's just so inspiring, so unique, and encourages people with their own voice. And it's like you do get really influenced by her because she's just such a incredible musician and player, and we would all try to, I think, emulate her in many different ways, and that was the way we kind of learned from her, I think. And I got a lot of incredible opportunities because I stayed there and I stayed with my string quartet. We ended up going to, there was a program in Graz in Austria that sent a bunch of musicians from all different places in the world, young musicians, and we got to perform together. So my quartet went, and it was the Belchea Quartet from London, who have a huge career, and they were there at the same time. And then there were young artists playing concertos. So that, like, to get an experience like that probably wouldn't have happened in other places. So I'm really glad. And then I always wanted to go to Europe or the US or both. So I went to the US first, and I went to NEC in Boston, and with Laurence Lesser was my teacher, and just the cello class there was incredible. It was huge. First of all, the school was huge. There's like 3 orchestras, and there were many cello teachers. Colin Carr was teaching there also, and there were 2 other cello teachers as well. So there's just lots of people, and Laurence Lesser's class was just amazing. Like the people that were in that class at the time, like Amit Peled. Oh, I'm not even going to remember all the people. Mickey Katz, who's now in the Boston Symphony. Gabriel Lipkind, lots of really like people who have like big solo careers now, and just to be around, and they were all different too. Like Laurence Lesser also, it wasn't like you couldn't see his teaching in like all the cellists. It was just everyone had their own personality, so that was encouraged. He was there to just kind of like give you his artistic ideas and guide you along your way. And of course, the orchestra experience there was amazing. Like the orchestra would meet 3 times a week, and some days it was just reading sessions where we'd like read Heldenleben or read. And the winds and brass, of course, like they're so focused on getting a great orchestra job, so they know these pieces. And the concert masters, there's a whole bunch of violinists who can play those solos just like that. And so to just read through repertoire, I was swimming. I was just like, whoa, this is amazing. But yeah, that made an impression, definitely. So, and being able to go to the Boston Symphony all the time and hear them play, and all the soloists that come there, I had really incredible memories of that, being in the hall, hearing them play. And in Holland, because I was doing a diploma, so I wasn't as involved in things at the school. I did some orchestra, but it was mainly about getting my lessons, going to a lot of concerts. And I started performing more. Like, I mean, I would have probably, if I hadn't joined the quartet, I probably would have stayed in Amsterdam and freelanced, because, yeah, I would have just gone that direction, stayed there longer.
Yeah, so you landed this job with a young quartet, was already established, touring, recording contracts, and you must have done some really interesting stuff. You mentioned in one, I think it was one of your interviews, how this memorable concert you played with them in Soweto, in a township in South Africa for kids. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, yeah, we had this really incredible experience of being connected with a agent in South Africa who organized tours there. And so he brought us there, and we played in many different places down there, and including bringing us to Soweto, to the townships, where we got to interact with kids. And like they brought us to do a kind of youth kind of presentation, and it's all like, I mean everyone's seen pictures of what it looks like there, so it really does look like that. That's how they live. And we were brought into a school, which was just a kind of like U-shaped building, I think, and then in the middle there's like a courtyard, and we just kind of played on the edge of the courtyard. And I don't know how much English they spoke, but we did present in English, but it was mostly the playing, and we played all kinds of classical music, and just the kind of joy and openness of the kids, which, I mean, kids are like that. They're open. They're waiting for, they're sponges. They're waiting for us to just show them and give them incredible things. So just the response of the kids to everything, like they're just so alive with the music. And there's this one video my colleagues took of as we're leaving, they just all wanted to come up and like hug us as we're leaving. Like it just this outpouring of joy and energy was really incredible.
And then you worked quite a bit in Israel with the Aviv Quartet, and got to know a part of your family you didn't really know, on your dad's mother's side.
Yeah, it's amazing how that happened. I had never been to Israel, and my grandmother, my father's mother, is from there. She left Israel in her 20s, I think, for to be married to my grandfather, who's British. And so I hadn't ever been there, and we did have lots of family there, a little bit distant, but lots of family. So I finally got to meet them when I went there, and they just like embraced me. Like they were just really happy to know more of the family. And Israel is such a special place. Very yeah, I rented a place like right in the middle of Tel Aviv, and just to be able to like walk to the beach and just the kind of energy there, and yeah, a really special place. And they love classical music. There's a really big, intense classical music following for chamber music too, and of course the quartet was very well supported by that too, and known there.
Yeah, and you met Yehonatan Berick there as well the first time, right?
Yeah, Jonathan. It was actually we weren't living there at the time, but we
Yeah.
went to teach at a summer festival called Mizra, which is up. You live on a kibbutz, and it's all happening there. And there was chamber music, and he was teaching violin, of course. And we were put together to play a couple of things together. We were in a Mendelssohn octet, my quartet, and he was part of that. Um, and he also played that. Is it the Bottesini Grand Duo with bass and violin?
Mm-hmm.
So that was my, I think, first experience of really seeing him play. And actually, that's not true. I had been to a concert of his before, but this was like seeing him play like right in front of me while I'm accompanying him. And he was just such a goof. He made so many jokes playing that piece. He was like dancing around and doing funny movements as he's playing this crazy virtuosic piece. And he is just, that's his personality, making people laugh, making people happy as much as possible.
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard about him, because he was my age exactly, and I had just left McGill where I'd done my undergraduate, and then well, it must have been just after that, because my teacher left, Mauricio Fuchs, and then he replaced him essentially, but he was so young, right? He was like 26 or something when he got this.
Yeah, maybe even 25 or
yeah,
younger.
Yeah. He was really young, yeah.
Yeah.
And then when he came to U of O, I heard this incredible concert he did in Tabaret of all the Isai solo sonatas in one go.
Oh, yeah.
And I have to say, I was just so shy to ever speak to him because I was so in awe of this man, just such an amazing violinist. And it's such an incredible loss to the musical community. But you must have learned so much from him. Of course, he's your life partner, but as a musician and just like, I'm sure just understanding about teaching music.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say how much I learned from him. It just like things just even come up now when I'm like, oh, okay, I get that now. Just of course I would see him teach and hear him teach, and I would ask him questions to help me with things, and playing with him. And now, of course, like when you watch him play and you kind of understand how his brain is working, and if you're on social media and you see the kind of things the students post, there's like photos of they made a table of elements of his ideas, and he had these like catchphrases that would kind of just like instigate the thing that he wanted with his students. So he'd just say this one word and they'd be like, oh yeah, and do it, and it sounds better. Like he just had all these, I mean, obviously he had the goods behind it, but like also all these tricks that immediately work to make things better. So it's if you can use that as your part of your tools, it's really amazing. But yeah, just now when I can watch videos of him playing, and just seeing the energy and how the music is being communicated, it's really I think we all get so much from that.
I was listening again to This Is My Music on CBC, and he talked about how as teachers we underestimate, that students underestimate what they can achieve, and often as teachers we also don't even realize what they can achieve. But he also mentioned, like, of course, he studied with this famous teacher, Ilona Feher, is that how you say her name? For 12 years. And such a contrast to you. You studied with so many teachers. What do you think that's like for someone studying with one amazing, great teacher as opposed to all these different influences?
I mean, I can't really say what it's like to have one teacher for a long time. The longest I had was maybe 5 years, when I was 5 to 10. That was a very early period. I probably could have been with any of them for longer, but it was just usually 2 or 3 years. And, you just, anyways, with any teacher, it's not up to the teacher to develop you, right? It's like unless you're really young and you're starting and you're just absorbing rather than thinking for yourself as much. But then at some point it starts turning around and you have to take the information you're getting and interpret it for yourself and understand it. So I usually found that, I'd get all this information for someone for 2 years, and then about 4 years later, I would be like, that's what they meant. It just took time to sink in, because every teacher has their priorities, right? Their values that are the top, like, this is what I believe you need to understand. And so they give you that. And I just found that it would, I'd be trying to do it while I was studying with them and like learning repertoire and doing all the other things you have to do. But it would be later, like, okay, that's what you meant. And it would sink in and kind of click. And then, so now I feel that I have all these really strong ideas from all these different great teachers that, like, I've hopefully absorbed and incorporated as part of my, way of presenting music. So I feel really lucky to have all those different influences.
But did Yehonatan talk about studying with her at all?
Oh yeah,
her
for
legacy?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, he was quite young when he started with her, and she was a tough teacher. The specifics of what she taught him, I don't know that as much. What I get is that she was demanding, and she had really great teachers, and he does kind of say that she was one of the biggest influences on him musically. So I don't know the specifics of what she gave him, but I mean, he also worked very hard on his own, especially after she passed. I think that was a year or a few years where he just practiced a lot and worked really hard on his own and figured out all that stuff,
Yeah. I was just looking, because I'd heard her name floated around, she taught Pinchas Zuckerman and like Shmuel Ashkenazi, like so many Shlomo ones. So all these people, like I think it was Cholon, is that the town?
Yeah.
I'm just saying that right. Yeah, I was thinking, because when I talked to James Ennis, he's saying people say, what are the chances of someone coming out of Brandon? He said actually pretty high, because there's this great community, this great teacher, and then he was talking about other musicians as well. It's interesting, you get this sort of wonderful, positive hothouse in certain places with just so much inspiration.
Yeah.
So we talked about one grandmother. Now you lost your other grandmother this year, your mom's mom, right? Your Japanese grandmother.
Yeah, we call her Bachan, like obaasan, Bachan. She was 103. And of course, both my grandparents lived through the Second World War. So it's just so different what we lived through compared to even our parents and then grandparents. That generation is, there's not very many of them left now. And so hopefully, we've absorb their kind of stories and what they went through, and that we have some understanding of what they lived through.
Yeah, so a lot of people listening to this won't be Canadian, and they won't know that Japanese Canadians were interned and all their property was seized during the Second World War. So your grandmother lived through that.
Yeah, my grandmother was the second oldest of 8 children, and they were living in Port Moody, BC, which is just outside of Vancouver. That's where they were born and grew up. They were second generation Canadian. My great grandparents came from Japan on my mom's side. And when the Second World War started, the Japanese Canadians in the West were taken from their homes and sent to internment camps in the internal BC and Alberta, and I think a little in Ontario also. There was a work camp. So my grandfather and my grandmother's brothers, they protested families being separated because they were going to separate the men from the families. And so they ended up getting sent to a work camp. So they were apart for the whole 3 years of the internment. And it was like ghost towns. They were sent to ghost towns. So there were people like who were living there. And so they kind of, who ran businesses and things. So they were put in these ghost towns and had to just figure out how to survive for those 3 years. And then at the end of the war, most of them didn't have homes left to go home to. Like, they had been sold or people had taken them over. So many went east and ended up in Ontario. So my grandmother's family and my grandfather ended up in Hamilton. So there's a huge family there now. And that's where my mom was born.
Yeah. So you've got a lot of strength and support from your family. just
yeah, I'm really lucky to have
go for
that.
it,
Yeah.
And your sister, you have such a close relationship with personally and professionally too. And well, as much as you've been able to play together, separated by the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah, we grew up, I mean, my sister and I, we have always been really close. And of course, we grew up hearing each other play and playing together sometimes. And we ended up studying at different times in different places, so we weren't together all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, whenever there's a chance to be together, period, or play together, even better, is really a treat.
And in terms of your Japanese heritage, so I'm worried I'm going to mispronounce your sister's name. How do you say Akemi?
Akemi, yeah.
Akemi. So she
Yeah.
studied the koto for 8 years.
Oh, was it 8 years? Oh,
That's what you said. This in
I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true. I can't. She must have told me that. Yeah. I don't know. I guess they just. I don't know if it's she wanted to or they felt like my parents felt like that would be a good idea. But yeah, she studied with Teresa Kobayashi in Vancouver for many years, and real thing with all the picks that you have to make with rice sticky stuff to put on
Mm-hmm.
your fingers, and there's the kota still at home and I'm sure she could still play it. But yeah, that's a really neat experience that she went and learned that traditional instrument.
But you weren't interested in that, or you just were too busy with everything else?
I feel like at that time I was already really into the music and cello stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of left to do that and not given more things. Probably that's why I was a bit older. And yeah.
So you when you left the Aviv Quartet and you came back to Canada, you really, what I find interesting is that you were just launching so many projects on your own, figuring out how to write grants, managing, doing publicity, like doing it all yourself after having been with a group where things were more taken care of. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day, how, I mean, even at the time, being in a string quartet was changing. I mean, I don't think there's almost any string quartets who make a living from just quartet activities. It's impossible. It just doesn't, it's the way the music business works now. It's not like that. So already during our quartet years, we were already starting to branch out and do other things. It wasn't possible to really survive just playing concerts. And it really, in reality, in music, I mean, so there's going to be, I don't know if you can hear that beat.
Yeah, do you want to just wait a minute?
Sure, it'll be a minute.
I'll just come back to the interview to say we have to stop because there's all this construction outside Rachel's apartment, and there was like explosions and horns, and if you're wondering what the knocking sound is, she's living next to a construction site, so there's no way around it. And you say it's just constant, like you have to try to sleep with this early in the morning.
Yeah, they start pretty early. Yeah.
Oh, poor you.
There were things.
Well, back to what we were talking about, had to do with managing and doing publicity, grant writing, which you're obviously really gifted at. You've managed to secure touring grants and recording grants and so many commissions from so many composers. Do you have any idea of how many pieces you have commissioned for your chamber music groups and also solo pieces and over the years?
I think I wrote something like over 25. That of course includes the Mosaïque project, which is 14 on its own. So maybe outside of that, maybe over 10 pieces for the chamber groups or solo that I've been involved in the commission.
Mm-hmm. Well, since you mentioned it, actually, that Ensemble Made in Canada, that Mosaïque project, it was really cool how you incorporated visual aspects and also even audience participation, that they could color in these tiles. Like, it's such very innovative way of thinking, and the way the concert was presented. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the project, if you don't know about it, it was born after the Canada 150 year, and it was by Ensemble Made in Canada, the piano quartet that I was playing with, and we commissioned 14 composers across the country to write very short piano quartets inspired by a different province or territory. And then we toured that piece, that big suite, across the country, and audience members could doodle or draw on little cards while they listened to the music. And so it became this art piece that goes along with it. And on their website, you can pull out you can pull out like all the pictures from Newfoundland, or all the pictures by people under a certain age, or if they wrote their age, so you were allowed to or not. All kinds of categories that you can look at the art from different perspectives from across the country. And it was definitely a collaborative group effort in asking the composers and dealing with all the practical production side of it. And the visual piece, I think that mostly came from Alyssa Leah, violinist. I think that she kind of might have been the first mention of that idea and it growing. But of course, we were all involved, and it was like making that all happen. It was definitely a group effort, and it was amazing to be in a group like that we kind of, everyone had their strengths and weaknesses, so we would work in that way. Like if you were good at this, you do that aspect, and if you're good at this, so it was really just very kind of organic way of working together. Yeah.
And then when you started doing orchestra auditions, I mean, first of all, not just any orchestra auditions, but principal cello. What was that process like for you to prepare?
Yeah, playing auditions is its own world of it's its own world. And, so, I hadn't come out of school preparing for that. Of course, I actually, every place I was, I did do the orchestra rep class with like really great teachers. Like in Boston, it was people from the Boston Symphony, and in Holland, I worked with someone from the Concertgebouw. So I did have, that background of learning about the excerpts from people who were in great orchestras. But actually preparing an audition is a whole other process. And I had took a few auditions and saw how much work I had to do. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's any, I mean, I got really lucky being able to join the National Arts Center Orchestra and that audition process. Cause like the more I sit on panels and the more I hear auditions and remember my experience and see people preparing for them, really great young musicians, I see how much like the particular circumstance of that day and hour and there's just so many factors involved in who actually ends up with the job, and it's a really, now, the more you learn, the more you realize from the other side what you could have done differently. But yeah, I can't complain because I'm very lucky in my position. But yeah, preparing an audition is a really special thing. And I always, when I work with people now and they come to play for me, I really try to communicate that, like, if you have to believe in what you're doing. And of course, some people are just like, I need to win a job. And, it doesn't matter how well you play, how prepared you are, and how fantastically you give an audition. Like, you just might not win the job for other reasons, it's like you have to be aware of, and there aren't that many jobs, there's a limited number. And actually these days, especially if you win an orchestra job, it's not the be all end all. Like, as we see, like, no one's job is secure. And in most places, it's maybe actually not enough to just survive on that. So you actually have to do other things, like everyone in the music world. Like, no one does just one thing to survive. So there's that aspect. And then it's also like, you have to believe in the way you're playing. Like, if you try to mold it into a certain way, and then you win a position where that's what's expected of you. I mean, I personally don't think I could go 20 years playing in a way that I just don't, it feels wrong to me. So, but yeah, I always think that, like, for me, the most important is the music, and the more that you focus on what the music is and its style and its depth, the more you're going to be taken away from, oh my God, I have to play perfectly. Because you're going to be trying to communicate the music the best way possible, which will include playing it well, so it's trying to, like, that's what I did for myself, at least, trying to take the focus away from like playing things well and, not making mistakes to like presenting the music and communicating that, which is the whole point of performance.
What kind of pre-concert routine do you have to calm yourself down and focus? And not necessarily auditions, but just pre-performance.
Yeah, it really changed. It depends on the performance. but when it's like something solo or like a solo Bach or something, or a bigger thing like a concerto, or if there's a huge solo in the orchestra repertoire we're playing, I would say I do use kind of meditation focused techniques sometimes if I have the time and the headspace to do it. Just one of those, where you even for like 30 seconds or a minute or two sit quietly and focus your breath and just let go of anything and be in the moment. And actually for practice too, that's one of the most valuable things, because only by being in the moment are you truly listening to yourself while you're playing, which is the essence of practice. If you're not really listening, you're just not getting anywhere. It's like that's the number one thing. And so just bringing myself to that space, whether it takes 10 seconds of just closing my eyes and finding it, or a few minutes of just calming it down. But yeah, and I think like when there is a performance that there is more pressure for just being nice to yourself before it, like taking care of yourself as you would for someone you love, making sure they're as comfortable as possible if you have the time and it's possible.
Yeah. I was thinking like sometimes when you told me about your beautiful duo album with Akemi, I can't remember the name of the album right now. If you can remind me.
Okay. Our Strength, Our Song.
Right. Yeah. And you were so excited because you said, I've had this idea for so many years and it's going to be so amazing. And you could talk about the album now. But before that, actually, because this is what I was wondering about, because you're always so full of ideas and inspiration and putting people together. Are you like a notebook kind of person, or is it more like computer file spreadsheets, or you just have like random notebooks, or you know what I mean?
Both.
Yeah.
I'm a big, I've always had like kind of a dream journal in a way. I mean, for music dreams and actual dreams. And I used to sometimes like write those things down and then just leave it, and then like years later see what and sometimes you've done some of those things, and some things it's like that's not important anymore, I don't want to do that. Or it just be in my head, this kind of like ideas that they start, especially on like long drives, or when your mind has the space to let it be open, which it doesn't happen all the time when you're so busy, right? When you finally have time to kind of let your brain, or you see something that inspires you, see someone else's project that like, oh yeah, well, I wish I could do that. And then it's just like waiting for the right opportunity to make it happen. And of course, like over the years, you learn how to make things happen. And you have the tools more, and it's possible. Like now I understand how to make certain projects happen. I know the steps that I'll need to take, and how much time it's going to take, and how much work. And yeah.
So Our Strength, Our Song is a really incredible album, very special.
Yeah, that was a very special project to me. It was. I think that came first. It was like I wanted to do something with my sister. Really, I mean, I played with so many great violinists. I'm spoiled with all the really amazing violinists I get to play with. But playing with my sister is just a very special experience. And she's an incredible player and musician. And she lives in Germany now, and I was like, okay, well, we got to do something together so she can come and do it with me. And of course I had all these composers that I've wanted to commission for many years. So it was a combination of those two things. And I always, I mean, I still feel like I love all composers and music, like so many different things, but to me, playing an album of all women's music felt like a good thing to do. And I still feel like that when I can. I like to be able to perform women's music and play with women performers, of course not exclusively, and it's not a fixed thing, but it's sometimes it's, I mean, my last group was all women, so but that doesn't, it's not exclusive. It's just, it felt good at the time to do that. It felt like the right thing to do. And so we ended up commissioning 3 different composers, Jocelyn Morlock, Alice Ho, and Rebecca Cummings. And it's Rebecca Cummings' piece, which is called Our Strength, Our Song, and it ended up being the title of the album. And then we played 3 older pieces by Violet Archer, Jean Coulthard, and Barbara Feldman. And they're all, like, they don't get played a lot. That was the other thing, like finding pieces that just don't get played, that are really strong pieces of music.
Yeah, and as we increase diversity and representation with the music we play, unfortunately, sometimes it's like people all hook onto one piece by one composer, you know what I mean? I find that a bit of that is happening now, and there's just so much to discover and new composers to encourage too. I'm curious about your practice routine, or if you have a routine, like in terms of your warm-ups or just things I mean, I'm sure you're just playing at such a high level all the time, maybe you don't need to do, well, normally, maybe in non-pandemic times, you're just playing so many concerts all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed over the years, and of course, right now with the way things are going, like a lot of activity and then nothing for long periods. So for me, and over the years, it's really been like, I want to focus on the music that I'm working on and that I am preparing. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I took out a whole bunch of music that I wanted to learn and work on. But then I actually ended up being so busy making videos, there was actually no time to work on any of that music. So I had all these ambitions of learning all this repertoire that I hadn't learned before, and just didn't happen. And now, of course, like there are enough demands that the music that I have to learn is stuff that I'm really interested to work on. And for me now, I think at some point I felt that playing scales was not helping my music making, because it was so kind of rigorous in the way I was doing it. It just didn't relate to, like, because, I really want to have every possibility of expression available to me. And that does not come from physically playing my instrument. That comes from my imagination. And then what, like, I hear or feel a sound in my head, how am I going to make it? And I don't learn that from playing the studies and scales. I learn that from like hearing it and figuring out physically how to make it. So that it's like, I have a piece of music I need to learn. First, I study the score. If there's a recording, I listen to the recording, because I want to hear the big picture and what it really means and what I'm trying to work for. Like, I never take out a piece of music and just start learning the notes and rhythm. It's just, unless it's something, actually, no, I don't do that, because it just gets me into too small a focus. I want the big picture of the end game, what I'm going for. And then it's like learning that and then kind of focusing in and making sure the details fit as much as possible by the date of the performance. that's how I work now. So it's like and of course now I've learned like how much time it takes me to learn something usually, and so I can, that's usually my guide of how to work. So also I found that of course, as I get older, I feel that when I approach the instrument, I know I can't go from no playing to like 6 hours a day. It's just, you have to guide that. But I really do believe in taking time off, because I find that it clears my mind and my ears. And then when I approach the instrument, it's just fresh. It's like, I don't have any, because we so physically get fixed in certain ways of playing. And especially, of course, playing in orchestra where you just don't hear yourself. So like you want to be comfortable, you don't want to be injuring yourself. So you get used to certain movements and certain physical ways that are great if you need to play a lot of repertoire and like for a lot of hours sitting there. But then when you go to be more creative with your own music, being fixed in that way is just, I find, not helpful. I need to free my ears, free my body, and find the ways. And of course, number one is like getting out what I want in my head with maximum efficiency. And I think the maximum efficiency is what helps me from getting the injuries, just being always aware of your body, that you're not getting stuck in ways that are just going to hurt it, listening to that.
Yeah. So when you take time off, is it not time off completely from music, or just time off from playing? Or will you just clear everything?
I I mean, and music is always part of my life, but not necessarily classical music. I listen to music
Mm-hmm.
all the time. I use all kinds of different music for different reasons, to help me in my life,
Yeah.
and inspire me or just relax. But yeah, I think for me, when it's possible to take time off from playing, I don't think it's a bad thing. And of course, I could see that in the future, like as I get older, it would be, I have to be more careful with it for sure. Already, I have to be more careful coming back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned making all those recordings. I was very touched early in the pandemic. You made these beautiful cello choir virtual recordings with members of our cello section and the people who regularly play with us who don't have a contract. And I think people not in our business don't realize what a huge part of the classical music world are freelancers, and no less respected, and it's no guarantee that you have any kind of security in our world, for sure. What are your perspectives like if you're going to give advice to people, who are 20 years old, or even looking back on yourself?
I mean, I think it's not any different from when I was in my 20s or even a teenager. I think it's like it's just a reality that you'll probably do a lot of different things in your life, even not music. It's just I never thought I'd have to know all the business side of the music. And my dream growing up was to play in a string quartet, and so I did that for 8 years, touring the world. And then I was like, okay, now I've kind of done that, and I was ready to move on to something else. So like, yes, it's possible to have one specific career line for all your working years, but it's not the norm, I don't think. And I think it's really, that's why I do those dream books kind of thing. It's like, what are your dreams and ambitions, and how would you make them possible? Like whatever it is, like. And I think there's so many young creative people these days. When I start looking online at what people are doing, the next generation after me, and now there's another generation, it's so inspiring, like the ideas they have and the things they are doing. I mean, really. And of course, it's not about making money or making a living. Of course, you have to figure that out too, how you're going to survive. But the passion and inspiration I see in younger generations is just amazing. And I just sit back and kind of think like, well, like it doesn't make me think, oh, I've got to do something. I just think, wow, that's really amazing. And I just have so much respect for the next generations that are coming and what they're doing.
Yeah, it's really beautifully said. Well, on that note, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really interesting.
Thanks so much, Leah, for doing this.
There's a reason why the suites for solo cello by Johann Sebastian Bach are some of the most recorded and played pieces for solo cello. Somehow in those simple dance movements and preludes, he managed to touch upon so many different aspects of human emotion and experience, from joy to sorrow, dark to light, playfulness, elegance, nostalgia. And when I went to record something at that time, the only thing I could imagine playing at that moment was this prelude from the Fifth Suite. It would just fit exactly where I was in that moment. And I'm someone who I always believe in playing for the audience and sharing the music, and that's the whole point of what we do. But as I played through the piece over for the recording, I realized that as I let myself just be carried along with the music in the moment by myself in that space and in that moment in time, as I let myself flow with that, it was almost healing. It was an act of healing, the playing of the music. And I don't think there's any human being in the world who could not benefit from some kind of healing in some form. And I wish for all of us that we are able to receive that in whatever form it comes, whether it be big or small. Here is Bach's Prelude from his Fifth Suite in C minor.
Season 1 of this podcast had 20 episodes, and Season 2 continues with a really interesting mix of musicians talking about their lives and careers, with perspectives on overcoming challenges, finding inspiration and connection through a life so enriched with music. Please follow this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts to be informed about each new episode.